What's up, man?
You sit in the car, let's go.
See you, Mark.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
Got a lot of it right, but that's really good.
Yeah.
Organization, or RESTful, which of course is the most generic.
Truly glorious. All right, so we are in Dolenga? Donahanga?
Dahlonega.
Oh, we're in Dahlonega, Georgia.
So the locals actually called it Dahlonega, and it was located far off in the forest, and we seemed to have arrived at just the perfect time where the leaves were falling and the weather was perfect. But we didn't yet know exactly what we were getting ourselves into.
What do you want now, like episode 17?
30 something, I don't know. Let's go get a beer.
Nevertheless, we were about as prepared as we were going to be at that point, so we took our final night in civilization to take a look around the town and see what this small little city of Dahlonega had to offer. Surprisingly, some pretty good brews and interesting mead.
Shaun and I are going to learn by doing and hike the Appalachian Trail 1 mile at a time for the next 5 days.
Georgia section.
Cheers. It's almost 10 p.m. I pretty much loaded this guy up. Shaun's going through his last minute panic, doing what he does best. Well, we scheduled a 7 a.m. pickup by a fellow who, you know, honestly, he sounds a little bit dodgy. We asked him what his price was, and he said, price is negotiable, we'll figure it out tomorrow morning, which isn't a good sign. But all the shuttles were like super expensive, 60, 70 bucks. You sure you got everything, Shaun? All right, so we just got dropped off at the trailhead. Bill Bryson in his book said that the approach trail was pretty much started at the middle of nowhere. It's a bit of an understatement. Our other options were pretty much not available. Uber wouldn't deliver this location. And so we called this guy and he wouldn't talk about price on the phone the night before. A little suspicious. So fast forward and we were in the Walmart parking lot the next morning, 7 a.m. This guy comes up and tells us that it's gonna be 100 bucks. And our first impression was like, so we negotiated with the guy. And so when he said 60 bucks, he'll come down there. We were just kind of like, okay. And so he drops us off where we are now, which by the way is several miles through bumpy dirt road in the mountains. So the other option would have been parking at the visitor center and leaving our car there, which would have resulted in a 6-mile hike just to get to the approach trail. No, to the start of the approach trail. And this isn't even the start of the approach trail. To the start of the approach to the approach trail. Or take mama's taxi, pay 60 bucks. And they would have dropped us probably at the visitor center. Yeah, this city cab guy ended up paying $75 for it. Absolutely worth it. Here we go.
That morning would set the tone for the rest of our trip. Except for the last day, every morning we woke up was hazy and misty, and it left a dew not only on the trees but on our tents and packs and clothes as well. But we didn't quite know that yet. What we did know is that the trail we were on was pretty level.
Seems like a pretty nice and tame trail. Beware of bears. Shaun isn't worried.
Off moment.
Look at that. We have reached the official beginning of the trail. That's been here a minute.
Where'd they start? They start in Georgia?
They started all over the place. So they didn't start at one specific time. Myron Avery bullied people into building the Appalachian Trail all across America. So
Nice wood you got there. Be a shame if something happened to it.
So where the trail would go would be a topic of some debate. No one could really agree on what locations would go where, and even Myron Avery himself wasn't too sure. What he did know is he wanted to span the Appalachian Mountains, and the first idea was that it would connect the greatest mountains on the East Coast. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, that wasn't exactly what happened. Sign the book. Leaving some NASA swag in there for the next lucky hikers.
Now, I've been talking about Myron Avery, but some of you who are more familiar with the AT might be asking, well, what about Benton MacKaye? He's the guy who's most well known as the father of the Appalachian Trail, and indeed, he was the guy who first published the idea in the unlikely place of the American Journal of Architects in 1921. In 1925, he managed to get a bunch of people together and form the first Appalachian Trail Conservatory meeting, but nothing really happened, not for 5 years. That wasn't until Myron Avery got on board and started really making things happen.
We just had a shuttle driver come up at a parking lot somewhere along the trail, offered to give us a ride if we need it, said it was all right to quit. What do you think, Shaun? Is it all right to quit? Oh, for the first time since we set out this morning, we can actually see the sun out through the trees. It's been properly misty for hours.
Now, Myron Avery had a reputation for being a kind of aggressive salesman, perhaps a go-getter, maybe even a little bit of a con man, and his character clashed dramatically with that of Benton MacKaye, who was more of an idealist, someone who wanted to use the trail to create societies up and down the East Coast that were free of capitalism and conservationist groups that lived off the land. As utopian as MacKaye's ideal might have been, it certainly wasn't enough to really get the job done. Avery, however, certainly had the tools and the skill set to push to make it happen, and in a period between 1930 and 1933, he built the entire Appalachian Trail through the use of volunteer groups up and down the East Coast. Think about that. He built an entire trail, over 2,100 miles long, in only 3 years, using just volunteer work, without paying a single penny. As Bill Bryson pointed out, armies have done less. Now, although MacKaye's idea of these utopian conservationist societies blossoming in the wake of the trail never really came to fruition, there are still shelters like you see here that exist up and down the trail every 10 miles or so.
Seriously, Shaun?
Available for use by any hiker and at no cost. Now, they're not luxurious affairs by any means, and some are newer than others, but they certainly meet the needs of true hikers very well. To this day, the shelters and other infrastructure such as bridges are maintained by volunteers. These same volunteers also put in a lot of effort to clean up the trail and make sure it is a sparkling representation of the conservationist ideals that MacKaye originally stood for. And they're doing a great job. During our trip on the trail, we hardly saw any trash at all, and the infrastructure that was in place was generally in good condition. That being said, it was clear that different sections of the trail were built by different groups, and each respective section reflected a different trail building philosophy. For example, one section might be a rugged climb up and down a steep mountain, while the next section might be a pleasant stroll through the woods, and this wasn't a reflection of the terrain or the amount of elevation change so much as the way they chose to build the trail. As mentioned before, since volunteers built the trail, there was little regulation on how it would be built, and it's interesting to see the result. As Patton once said, don't tell people how to do things, tell them what to do and let them surprise you with their results. I would even go so far as to say that this diversity in methodology is one of the major reasons why the trail is so enjoyable to hike. Even so, there are some portions which are definitely more challenging than others, and some people respond to that differently than others.
So the trail, originally estimated to be 1,200 miles, ended up being well over 2,000, which is kind of a funny story because the actual estimate of the trail is kind of uncertain. Some estimates put it at 2,118 point something miles, and other estimates put it as high as 2,200 miles. The reality is it's somewhere in between, probably around 2,150 in total, but every year it changes at least a little bit as housing developments are installed, highways are built, and other infrastructure developments are improved. So if you hike the trail one year, you could turn around and hike it next year and it would be a little bit different.
A little bit.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
For us first-timers, however, we found that the trail was just fine the way it was, and we liked every part of it. Well, most of it, anyway.
I don't want to go downhill. I just want to go straight.
How's it going, Shaun?
In all seriousness, although beautiful, the first day was a bit of a shock on our bodies. For a couple of guys who spend most of their work life sitting down, it was challenging to adapt to hiking the entire day. And by the time we reached Hightower Gap, our feet were hurting and our knees were sore.
So where are we at, Shaun? We're at about mile 9 on the trail, not including the approach trail, which puts us about a little over 10 miles, 11 miles, no, a little over 11 miles. The goal is to reach Gooch Mountain Shelter, which is at 15.8 miles. The next campsite is 14.7. It's a creek, but we're not technically supposed to camp there, I don't think. I mean, it's not saying that you can't, but they say because of bears. Shaun will camp there. Shaun doesn't care.
We got carabiners and rope, we'll just hang it.
Yeah, I mean, we could camp there, but it's only a mile away. So why would we camp at the creek, right, Shaun? When it's only a mile further to a flat shelter where we don't have to put the tent up. So 1,200 miles, really hard to comprehend when we're here walking on it right now. And whatever the exact mileage is, it for a long time was the longest hiking trail in the world. Now there are others that exceed it, including a couple out west here in the United States, and I'm sure there's a few overseas.
Although not the longest trail in the world, it is still probably the most well-known. And there are different ways to tackle it. For a hike like ours, it's called a section hike, where you tackle only a small portion of the trail at a time, which is perfect for people who can't take out 4 or 5 months of their life to hike the entire thing in one go. And it was certainly a good thing that we were on a section hike instead of what they call a through hike, which is going from Georgia to Maine, the entire 2,100 plus miles, because we had certain inefficiencies in how we packed. I had a heavy-duty rope and extra carabiners that I really didn't need, along with sunglasses that I never used, and some extra equipment that now, looking back, I almost certainly could have done without. Even so, we had mostly packed pretty good.
We walked 14 miles or so today. Shaun's out there cooking his food. There's a lot of steep climbs. This last one that we just got done with was supposed to be about 700 meters. It's been beautiful, but that last slog was not easy. So yeah, tomorrow is going to be the second day. My feet are sore. We'll see how I recover overnight. Well, I'm going to read a book, use what daylight's left, and go to sleep. We're at Cooper Gap, day 2. We made 0.7 miles. I tried to make a recording this morning, but it was too dark, so all you get is a few shots of the campsite. So the goal today is at least Woody Gap. It was raining. What stage, Shaun, are you right now? You're definitely not stage 1, Shaun.
Stage 2.
I'm optimistic we can hold that level for a while.
Depends on how steep that hill is, we gotta climb that.
Yeah, there it is. Let's go!
Despite that early morning pessimism, the day and the hike turned out to be pretty nice. The sun came out after a few hours and dried off our packs pretty quickly. Although there were some hills, there was nothing too bad, and it turned out we were making pretty good progress. After having some concern when going to bed the previous night that my feet wouldn't be able to handle 5 days of it, we could see the light at the end of the tunnel. And by midday, Shaun had even earned his trail name. I'm still not exactly sure why it's so much easier for Shaun, or should I call him Trueno, to run down the hills while I had to baby my knees at every step. At the beginning of the day, no part of me really hurt that bad, but after descending several hills, your knees start to take a beating. But Shaun didn't seem to have a problem with that. Inversely, I found it very easy to handle the ascents up steep hills, taking it one step at a time and just keep going until I reach the top. I guess every hiker has their strengths and their weaknesses.
All right, so we are making pretty good progress today, but we're hurting, we're suffering for it.
Took a little nappy nap on my nappy pad.
Yep, and then made some coffee because we're not that hardcore. Speaking of hardcore, there are certain people who've tackled this trail in ridiculous times.
There's always somebody who has to ruin it for the rest of us.
Joe McConaughey completed this trail from south to north in 45 days, 12 hours, and 7 minutes. At the end of the day, we're gonna be hopefully 24 miles in, definitely 20 miles in. See you guys after Woody's Gap.
After over a day and a half of hiking through dense vegetation and shroudy mist, we finally got a glimpse of how far we had really climbed on the way to Woody Gap. It was astonishing how high up we were, especially since we didn't really notice that we were climbing that much. Sure, there were some steep hills here and there, but most of the time the gradient was kind of smooth. If you're like me, you think of the United States as a developed country, populated, conquered. But the Appalachian Trail lets you see how much woodland there still is in the United States, even on the relatively densely populated East Coast. As far as we could see, it was nothing but vegetation with maybe a clearing or a small town here and there. And this was a recurring theme through the trip. I wonder if it's like this through the entire Appalachian Trail. And maybe one day I can find out.
So our goal today is to make it to a campsite. I forgot the name of it. It's another 3.6 miles, which is the shortest stint we had today. But the real challenge is going to be Blood Mountain tomorrow, which is about 4 or 5 miles of pretty much just uphill to the top of the mountain.
And then we drop the ring in it.
Yeah.
And our adventure's over.
Well,
Right?
we have no eagles to pick us up, so we have to go back.
Ah.
Yeah.
Having grown up in Arizona, one of the mistakes I made in the Appalachian Trail was bringing too much water with me. And I was surprised by the ubiquity of water in the trail. Every few miles there was a stream with crystal clear water that we could take from. Even so, I was sure to filter it before putting it into my pack. I began the hike by carrying over a gallon of water with me all the time. But as the second day drew to a close, I found I was carrying less and worrying less about the availability of water.
So we have reached Lance Creek Restoration Area. We managed to find a couple spots to set up our tents. It's been pretty crowded. We have met Andy and Elizabeth, correct? Say hi. They were kind enough to share their little area with us. If the previous figure was not astonishing enough, someone else has completed the entire Appalachian Trail. Carl Saab, I believe was his name. Carl Saab, 41 days, 7 hours and a few minutes, which means his pace was about 50 miles per day. To give you perspective, usually completing the Appalachian Trail takes 5 to 7 months, with some people taking as long as 8 or 9 months. And in Bill Bryson's book, Walk in the Woods, he describes some people taking 9 months and collapsing upon arrival. Shaun's about done packing up. I'm ready to go. It's only moments before we start our 5-mile journey to the top of Blood Mountain, or to be specific, 4.9. Starting off at the Blood Mountain hike with a level 3 Shaun and an admittedly level 2 Matt. Didn't sleep much last night. It was rainy, tent leaked, should have got that waterproofed. Everything's damp, and because it was raining when we woke up, we weren't able to make coffee.
The path up to Blood Mountain was steep, and with every step it seemed to get even steeper. On top of that, because everything was damp, it was just a little bit heavier than it was when we set out, making each step more painful and more challenging. The ceaseless drizzle offered no hope of things drying on the way as it did the day before. The haze that surrounded us offered no respite in the way of pleasant views or sunshine, but nevertheless we pushed forward. Eventually, we emerged onto the top of Blood Mountain and were rewarded with the sight of the ancient shelter placed on top, built as one of the first on the Appalachian Trail in 1936.
Thank God. What level, Shaun?
2.5.
2.5. He's happy you arrived. Tell you what, so am I. It's the hardest part of the trail.
After reaching the top well ahead of the other hikers, we took our time, busted out lunch, and made a cup of coffee. We could see ourselves steaming through the light in the window, and it was kind of a surreal sight to see.
So we got a few more days. Our initial plan was about 78 mile mark, including the approach trail, so about 75 miles, but that's not gonna happen. It's a 20-some mile stretch between the two gaps, so I think we're looking at Ukakoy Gap. Taking it easy for the next couple days. We got another 3 miles in us today. We got a chance to take a shower, do some laundry, stock up on anything we need.
Instant coffee.
No,
Maybe a little more jet oil.
beer is in our foreseeable future.